welcome to the Last Line of Defense. My name is Seth Jones, and I am joined today by the Honorable Kari Bingen. Kari was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security in the Pentagon. That is the number 2 intelligence official in the entire Department of Defense, now War, and is currently the director of the Aerospace Security Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Kari, it is great to have you on.
Great to be here, Seth. I'm the last guest of 2025. I don't know if that's a good thing or you just couldn't find anybody else.
Oh, no, it's we're saving the best for last in 2025. And I'm glad you noted that because this is the end of year episode. So what we are doing today is Kari and I are both providing our views of what was surprising in 2025 and then what are wild cards in 2026. But I've also asked Kari to think about what are some sort of funny surprises and potential predictions for 2026. So that should be a good session. Lots of interesting stuff. Kari, let's start off with 2025. What surprised you as you look back over the year?
So one of the big events for me was the stunning success of Operation Midnight Hammer. And I imagine you'll talk about this as well, but this was a sophisticated U.S. military operation to set back Iran's nuclear program. And I think about just the quiet intelligence and military planning professionals that have probably spent years deciphering and planning such a targeting mission. It showed how America and our military can do stunning things, the deception, the mass coordination of strikes with the B-2 bomber, the mother of all bombs, tactical air, tankers. It showed the relevance of these sophisticated weapons and platforms, as well as stealth, and I hope our adversaries are taking note.
So, Kari, I have to ask, there'd been some debate afterwards and even more recently about how effective that operation was in setting back Iran's nuclear program. From your perspective, what does the evidence show? I mean, you were at the top of intelligence in the Pentagon, so this is your world. What's your general sense about what the information shows?
I'm no longer in, so it's hard to say definitively, but it does appear from work that our colleagues and other analysts have done based on open source and other sourcing that Iran's nuclear program has been set back. We'll see to what degree and how long it takes them to rebuild. But I think it's been very interesting since then how quiet Iran has been. So we'll see where they're going in the year ahead.
Yeah, so my first one actually was just sticking with the Middle East, was the speed with which Israel actually gained air dominance over Iran. It has been almost 4 years since the war in Ukraine started, and Russia still has not achieved air superiority over Ukraine. Again, 4 years into this war, the Russians cannot fly aircraft really over Ukrainian soil. Yet during Operation Rising Lion in 2025, I was actually shocked at how quickly, in a matter of roughly 3 to 4 days, that's all it took, Israel gained complete air dominance over Iran, which means they could hit basically any target they wanted. What was interesting is the combination of special operations and intelligence units on the ground, cyber, informational elements they used, standoff missiles, also just the well-publicized Mossad operations, Israel's intelligence agency, of June 13th, 2025, that killed the leadership of Iran's Strategic Air Defense and Long-Range Strike Unit, the Republican Guard Corps, or IRGC, Aerospace forces. And then over the next 24 hours, they strike over 100 targets with nearly 200 sorties, including U.S.-manufactured F-35s, out of Dallas-Fort Worth. So it's just sort of stunning how quickly they were able to do that. I think no one, or almost no one, would have guessed. So yes, I mean, on that, I think we've got surprises both on the U.S. side and also the Israeli side. All right, Kari, that means you're up for number 2 now. What else surprised you over the course of 2025?
So I don't know that it would be a surprise, but let's go to the other side of the world, China. China in September conducted a massive military parade where they showed off an array of weaponry, missiles, and I think it just highlights the stunning speed with which China has ramped up its defense industrial base, and it is very much signaling to the rest of the world, 2027 just around the corner. Xi has told his military to be ready, and they are showing the force that is getting ready.
Yeah, it is interesting, Kari, watching the parade, and those were just the weapon systems that the Chinese wanted people to see, but they still had some nuclear systems there, including like the DF-5 and the DF-61. They had hypersonic missiles, DF-17. They had a range of unmanned and uncrewed systems. They had ground, including robot dogs, some unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, like I think the AJX-002, some directed energy systems, ground forces, so tanks Type 9B and Type 100, some amphibious vehicles. But it's just across the board, it's just the sheer volume and scale that over the course of 2025, the Chinese developed weapon systems. It's been talked about before, but the shipbuilding capacity, both commercial and defense, of the Chinese is 230 times larger than the U.S. I mean, it's an order of magnitude larger what the Chinese can produce in terms of commercial and military ships. I mean, one Chinese shipyard has the capacity to produce more ships than all U.S. shipyards combined. And, Kari, when we had Jensen Huang in recently, who runs NVIDIA, he pointed out even on some things like electricity production, China now has 3.75 terawatts of power generation capacity, which is more than double the U.S. capacity for electricity production. And that becomes important for the industrial base and AI, those facilities. So, the Chinese have problems, corruption, probably some joint problems, power projection, peace disease. They haven't fought a war since the 1970s. But I think one thing that also struck me over 2025 is they are building at mass and scale in the defense business. I mean, if I can ask you, is there anything, Kari, that happened with the Chinese then that also surprised you? Any of their actions that surprised you?
Well, in the parade itself, what was interesting to observe is that the nuclear forces that they displayed, so the longer range missiles, the hypersonic missiles, they didn't display theater systems. These were all longer range systems that could range U.S. bases and the U.S. homeland. So there's, I think, some messaging there, but it also highlights the rapid buildup of their nuclear forces, not just modernization, but developing and introducing a variety of new systems into their force. We're now getting to a point where we will have to rethink our nuclear strategy of not just U.S. deterring Russian nuclear forces, but how do you simultaneously deter two nuclear peers? The other piece that wasn't necessarily paraded, but that I've been paying close attention to, is in the space arena. We're putting out a report early in 2026 looking at China's space industrial base. And similar to these other areas, like you highlighted, South, the shipbuilding, they are rapidly capacitizing for building satellites. So we're seeing them build gigafactories, megafactories to mass produce thousands of satellites a year. On the military front, we're seeing them hone their tactics for what one U.S. general called dogfighting in space. So there have been some firsts for them in the space front, including just the highest number of launches that we've seen this year thus far out of them.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And you expect that to continue, is that right?
We do. We
Yeah.
absolutely do.
All right, so I think it's my turn next on. So I think I'm going to move us to the Western Hemisphere and Latin America. I mean, I would say I think one has to be surprised. Not necessarily that the Western Hemisphere was a focus, because I think President Trump had already indicated during the campaign that they were going to, as part of the America First strategy, they were going to come home, but also focus more on the U.S.'s hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. I would say what surprised me, though, was the use of some of my old colleagues in the Joint Special Operations community, using them for strikes against Venezuelan drug boats, as well as to bring a carrier strike group into the region, I think really with an effort to overthrow Maduro. And just the sheer volume, I mean, 25% of the Navy's deployed surface fleet having that in the Caribbean, with all of the other things going on in the world, with the Chinese and the threat that the Chinese pose in the South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, with the threat that the Russians pose with an ongoing war, and then the activity they've got in the Black Sea, all of the sabotage and subversion they're doing in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, that the U.S. would spend such a large part of its naval force for essentially drug traffickers. Yeah, that surprised me definitely. So I think I think most people would be lying if they told you that they predicted that.
Well, and what's been interesting in the past is that Southcom AOR, whether it be the counter-drug mission, ISR flights, has always been lowest on the priority list because all of our military assets have gone to the Middle East or to Asia. And so it's been long been viewed as this readiness sink. But now you're seeing it become the top priority. And we'll have to see with the national security strategy that was recently announced, a national defense strategy still to come, what additional force structure and posture changes will follow with the Western Hemisphere as the top priority. The NSS, we can talk through that as well. It's the president has been clear from the outset on what his national security priorities were. You saw it in the State of the Union. You've seen it in some of the early executive orders. It was border security, homeland defense. So Golden Dome is part of the top of my list as well. It was defense industrial base and shipbuilding, as you mentioned. I'll tell you, though, Seth, I'm planning to do a cruise to the Caribbean for Christmas, and I just hope I don't run into any of those 25% of the naval fleet deployed there.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is the time to be doing a big cruise in the Caribbean. Certainly, just keep an eye out for any kind of a Predator Reaper flying above you. You don't want a Hellfire missile coming at the boat.
No. So we didn't talk Russia-Ukraine.
I know. Well, I'm happy to start there. I will tell you, I am surprised at how poorly the Russians continue to fight in Ukraine. Now, Kari, when I was in Afghanistan working with U.S. Special Operations over the course of that 20-year war, there was this saying that went around, and, forgive me for saying this because, probably was mostly untrue, but the NATO mission was called the International Security Assistance Efforts, or ISAF. And the acronym was ISAF. And many U.S. soldiers, and I actually wrote about this in my book, In the Graveyard of Empires, started referring to it as I suck at fighting for NATO, which is a little unfortunate. But I think they were just talking about a number of NATO forces really not wanting to get involved in heavy combat. Well, I think I would just escalate that in a major way to the Russians. I mean, where we are by the end of 2025, I'm shocked. 1.2 million Russian casualties during that time period. Somewhere around 300,000 Russians killed. So the casualties was both wounded and killed. 300,000 Russians killed. Just to give people a kind of sense of the comparison, in Afghanistan, the U.S. lost 2,465 soldiers. Again, Russian fatalities, 300,000 in 4 years. In the U.S., that was a 20-year period. Iraq, 4,492. Even the Soviets, they lost 14,000 in Afghanistan in the 1980s, 12,000 Russian soldiers killed in Chechnya. So the order of magnitude is massive. I would have even predicted faster rates of advance. We're still at, 80 meters, 100 meters per day, which is Battle of the Somme in World War I. I mean, these are glacial rates. And then just less than 1% of Ukrainian territory taken by the Russians since January of 2024. So really the last nearly 2 years of the war. They're just, they're inching along, suffering enormous casualties. This is supposed to be one of the most effective fighting forces in the world, or at least some had predicted that. But boy, I mean, as I look back at 2025, it's another grueling year for the Russian military. It's massively underperformed. I'm surprised. I'm actually surprised at how badly they're performing against a much smaller Ukrainian military. But I think you probably got something to say, Kari, I'm guessing, about the Ukrainian side of this.
Well, so here's the other surprise for me on both the Russian and the Ukrainian side. So you look at how drone warfare has evolved on the battlefield there, and both sides are innovating and rapidly adapting. So, in the face of heavy electronic warfare or jamming of those drones, what did both sides do? They switched to first person video FPV drones and controlling them via fiber optic tethers. So these, spools of miles and miles of cable or something that basically looks like a fishing line to control those drones so that you don't have to use radio or satellite communications. The innovation cycle on both the Russian and the Ukrainian sides. I was out in the Baltics earlier this year, and they were talking weeks, 6 weeks or less, that both sides are innovating on the battlefield. One particular operation on the Ukrainian side, though,
S-
really sticks out in
This
my
was
head.
a huge surprise.
Yeah, Operation Spiderweb. So this was the Ukrainians figuring out how to infiltrate masses of drones deep into mainland Russia. Those drones were remotely launched, went and targeted Russian strategic forces, strategic bombers, aircraft on their bases. Just a stunning operational success that you knew was probably not just months, but maybe even years in the making to pull off. With sources and targeting and all of that remote command and control. So two things I think were interesting there too is I think it also highlighted, sometimes I think we're very conservative in how we think about escalation risk. I mean, the Ukrainians went after Russian strategic forces
Yeah,
and nuclear
nuclear
forces.
capable bombers.
Yeah, and you didn't see this high escalation response by the Russians. They're still in very much a tactical stalemate. But then also it highlights for me the vulnerability of U.S. bases. And could we see one of our adversaries do something similar against U.S. bases, strategic forces? I mean, heck, we've seen over the last year or two unknown drones hovering over U.S. military installations. So that's something we'll have to think about going forward and how we defend against it.
All right. Well, I want to finish up with funny surprise from 2025. Unless you've got one or two more you wanted to add.
If I can just hit briefly, getting out of the regional space, other big developments. We talked Homeland Defense already, but Golden Dome, a really big initiative announced by the president, modeled after Iron Dome in Israel, which was stunningly successful in protecting them against Iranian
And then
and other drones.
maybe Ronald Reagan's Star Wars initiative,
Yeah.
SDI.
Yep, it'll look a little different, but
Yeah.
yes, is defending the American homeland against an array of ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, advanced aerial threats, etc. And then the other surprise here is really in the acquisition reforms that Secretary of War Seth announced back in November. Pretty stunning for a secretary to announce such a major reform package focused on speed, accountability, more quickly delivering capabilities to the field, commercial preference. So now you have an administration with 3 years left to actually implement these. If they can actually implement what they're saying, I think there's going to be a lot of goodness there. And then lastly on my list for 25 is defense spending. President Trump has pushed them, but you now have our allies spending more on defense. NATO committing to 5%, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all committing increased defense spending. Our
Not
administration.
really the U.S. though.
Yeah, so although they said this year was the first $1 trillion budget request, a large portion of that comes out of the reconciliation package passed by Congress. So their actual base budget was the same as Biden's the prior year. And I think it's hovering, the total budget spend is somewhere at 3.3 to 3.5% of GDP when we're pushing our allies to 5%.
Yep. But it's big. We're certainly asking our allies to spend more on defense at upwards of 5%, although about a 1.5% of that, at least in the European context, has been like infrastructure building. So bridges, for example. But I think we're seeing it with the Poles, the Finns, the Baltic states. They are really going up in percentages of their GDP they're spending on defense. The U.S. compared to that is pretty low. All right, how about your sort of funny surprise for 2025, and then I'll give you mine.
Let's see. Well, no cabinet level firings so far.
Is that a funny surprise?
I guess that's not. It's an observation. I guess I shouldn't say.
Okay.
In the world that I live in, which is space and strategic forces, there was a Netflix movie out earlier this year, House of Dynamite. Has had its good points and its weaknesses, but it got the American public talking more about missile defense, nuclear deterrence, just an important part that is often neglected in the broader defense conversation, including amongst the general public. Let's see. I thought we had a pretty great military parade with the U.S. Army celebrating its 50th birthday. So that actually, maybe that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
It was a much better parade than maybe what we thought it would be going in.
Yeah. All right. I'll give you mine as someone who grew up in New England playing ice hockey. Our great neighbor to the north, NATO ally, my wife is Canadian. It took 1 second of the U.S. versus Canada in ice hockey in the Four Nations tournament to have the first fight. And then within the first 9 seconds, Kari, there were 3 fights. And you had like the Canadian Prime Minister and the U.S. President chirping on both sides about this. It was funny to some degree, but it was kind of sad that with our neighbor to the north, even our sporting games deteriorated. So my hope is with the Olympics, that changes. The sad part for the Americans is they won that game. I think they probably won 2 of the 3 fights, won the game, but then lost in the finals to Canada. So they'll have chance, as we'll get to in 2026, maybe, to make a prediction about how that goes. But that brings us to 2026. So what's your first prediction for a wild card in 2026?
Yeah, it's been reported that the president may meet with Chinese officials up to 4 times in this coming year, including with President Xi in the spring of 2026. So I think we're going to see a deal with China. Now, I think it'll likely be something in the economic space, maybe trade, tariffs. We'll have to see what that means for national security and the assurance of our regional allies. But I think we'll see some sort of deal with China.
Like a big one. Will that be a good thing?
I think it depends. I think on the economic front, it could be good. Stabilize the relationship. What I worry about and what we'll have to see is what it means for national security, what it means for assurance of Taiwan and our other partners in the region.
All right. Well, my turn. Since we talked about Venezuela, sort of some interesting possibilities. Some of these are not good at all, but I think there's certainly a reasonable possibility that if Maduro continues in power in Venezuela, that the U.S. keeps moving up the escalatory ladder and starts conducting land strikes in Venezuela against government facilities and potentially decapitation strikes against Maduro. I think it's actually even interesting if Maduro were to step down, if we were to see some type of civil unrest in the country. I think it'd also be interesting if we start seeing some of these drug trafficking organizations, or even Venezuela itself, respond to all these strikes. Would be really unfortunate. But, the way a number of terrorist organizations have operated against the U.S., either overseas or at home, I wouldn't put it past that as a possibility. I know that's kind of grim, but we're looking at 2026 and we've got an escalating situation. So I think this one could go in a number of directions, some of which obviously would not be very good for the United States.
I agree. Our forces are clearly postured for greater military action and greater escalatory action, as you highlight. Here's the thing as well is Venezuela is going to be alone in all of this. Do not expect Russia or Chinese assistance. Just like when we talked about Iran earlier, they did not get assistance from their good buds, Iran, or from their good buds, Russia or China. I don't expect either to come to Venezuela's aid either.
I think they've got the Cubans, and that's probably about it in 2026. Hey, what else do you have for?
I was going to say for you. What else is on your list?
Oh, okay. Thought you were going to throw it back to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got Ukraine going in 2 separate directions. One is Russian breakthrough around a city like Kupiansk or Pokrovsk. Don't think it's high likelihood, but there have been a few situations where there have been some concern about Ukrainian forces getting surrounded. But that's a possibility. Again, I consider it relatively low, but I think there's another interesting side of that, and that is the Ukrainians really start to produce their Flamingo long-range strike capabilities and start hitting targets in Russia, including around Russian cities, so that the populations of St. Petersburg or of Moscow start to really feel the war come home, because the Ukrainians can hit military facilities, industrial-based facilities, possibly even oil and gas facilities, in a range of different areas of Russia, because they're limited right now using drones. I mean, you mentioned Operation Spider's Web, but if they can get something like the Tomahawk version, it won't be quite like that, of a Ukrainian capability, boy, long-range strikes in Russia would be a big psychological boost to the Ukrainians, and would certainly be interesting from a Russian perspective, because there are going to be a lot of video clips of stuff exploding in or around major Russian cities. So that's where those are some possible wild cards in the Ukraine war. All right, what else do you have?
Let's see. I think all quiet on the Iranian and North Korea front. North Korea was not mentioned in the national security strategy. We have not seen much in terms of Iranian developments. I think it'll be an open question as to whether we see activity on that front. North Korea has tended to surprise us around the holidays writ large, so I'll be looking here this Christmas time for something to happen. Maybe it won't be from North Korea. They've tended to
You
be
mean like a
fairly
test, a
quiet.
missile test or something?
They've threatened missile and nuclear tests in Christmases past. But with Trump in power, Kim Jong-un has tended to hold back a bit. So I don't know if this is a surprise or not, but don't know that we'll see much activity out of the Iranians and the North Koreans going into 2026. Total wild card for me. And I'm going way out here on a limb, but how will we see the India-China relationship evolve over the next year? You're seeing Iran or India and Russia engage more. You had Putin and Modi with a high-level visit, a month or two ago. Modi has not endeared himself to Trump and vice versa. So wouldn't that be a kicker if you saw something move on that front?
So we are almost at time, and I mean, let me add two more, and then I'm going to turn it back to you for a little levity. If you got a good one on, say, Starship or something like that, prediction. Okay, so two more serious ones. One is, I have this deep concern that with the Russians already blowing factories up in Europe, undersea cables, cutting undersea cables, flying drones and fighter aircraft right along NATO's eastern flank, pipeline getting targeted, assassinations inside of Europe, that there is a Russian missile or a drone that actually strikes a military or civilian target in Poland, the Baltics, somewhere inside of NATO. It's an actual strike, and maybe the first big test of NATO Article 5. What are they going to do in response? So that's one. The other is House flips in the midterm elections. Again, these are just possibilities, and begins a series of investigations, including on U.S. strikes in the Western Hemisphere. So this issue may rear up in multiple ways in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for a little fun as we end.
I'm going to see what Elon Musk does this year. Will he be invited back to the White House? I'd love to see Starship, which is that mega rocket bigger than the Saturn, taller than the Saturn V. I'd love to see a success there. That'll be pretty awesome for a former rocket scientist.
Well, I'm going to start with a little levity in the same place. I asked Google Gemini, for a prediction in 2026, and they said Elon Musk appoints an AI model as of XI. So they've got overseeing Grok. They've got an AI model, no longer a human CEO. So that'd be an interesting development. Anyway, that's what Google AI is telling me. And the second, on a slightly more serious note, I think I'll be wrong here, but I think U.S. gets a second chance in the Olympics to face off against the Canadians. They actually don't play each other early in the tournament, and they win, and there are no fights. It's a peaceful defeat of the Canadians in the Winter Olympics in the sport of ice hockey.
And it's peaceful, huh?
And it's peaceful, right? I'm trying to end on a positive note. And just a note, 250th anniversary of the United States in 2026. And despite all predictions about Armageddon and the apocalypse, Kari, we're still here. I think the U.S. is still pretty resilient. But I'll leave you with the last word.
We're still here. Our democracy is still here. And, Seth, I think tied to that, because we, in addition to 250 years of our nation's existence, we also celebrated 250 years of the Army, 250 years of the U.S. Marine Corps. You and I have both spent careers working alongside our U.S. military forces. And I'm always reminded that is 1% of the nation. 1% of our nation serves. And so, as we end this year, head in the holiday season, just thinking about the sacrifices that our men and women in uniform make serving around the world. We'll always keep them close in our hearts and heads.
Well, that's a great way to end it, Kari. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the last line of defense, and have a great new year.
You as well.
Thanks for listening to our episode today. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For more analysis, please visit csis.org. This is The Last Line of Defense.